Alan, what are the different methodologies between science and religion?
Science depends on observable, measurable, reproducible observations at its core. Religion has a long history of oral tradition that passes down. It has other ways of looking at the world. I'm not really an expert on theology, so to give you an answer on religious methodology is tough, but people use a kind of philosophical analysis that's different from science. Science is bounded in observables.
So, what are the limits of science?
Science is, by definition, limited to natural explanations of the natural world. And that means that it's limited to things we can observe, that we can measure, that we can reproducibly observe, that if I observe it, you observe it, we'll get the same answer every time. Those are the limits. And therefore, as soon as you get into domains of the supernatural or non-natural world, however you want to label it, you move out of the realm of science.
I've been trying to think of two categories of this second part, this area beyond science. One are things that are purely existing in a non-physical world, if such exists, angels and spirits or whatever. That I understand. But there are things in the physical world that religion claims, such as miracles or revelations or answered prayer or morality, for that matter. These are things that are perhaps amenable to social science analysis. How does science deal with things in the physical world that are perhaps not reproducible according to traditional scientific methodology?
So an interesting issue is one like morality. Can science give us a scientific answer to morality? And the answer to that is no. It's a matter of belief, not a matter of observation or measuring. Now, what you can test scientifically is how people use concepts of morality. How do people use it? How do they form it? How do they transmit it? How do they teach morality to their children? What's the meaning of morality in their life? But the moral question, is this good? Is this bad? Is not amenable to science.
Well, some would say it is. Some would say that you can do an evolutionary psychology of the development of certain kinds of morals based upon what's good for maintaining the genetic line or the species line or whatever your biological theory happens to be, and you can get a genesis of where that morality comes from.
But that's studying the evolution of morality. That's not studying morality per se. That's not answering the question of is it good or is it not good. It's how do people come to believe what they believe. And that's a different kind of a question than the ultimate truth of is it good or is it bad.
But doesn't if you could demonstrate that a certain moral attitude, and altruism is one of the ones that is studied, can be shown to why it was, and you would be 100% convinced of why this altruism developed as a species enhancing vehicle. Wouldn't that go a long way towards eliminating some artificial goodness or badness by saying it is good only in the very limited sense that it perpetuated this genetic line?
That then isn't about morality. Morality, by definition, is a philosophical belief point of view. If you say, is something adaptive to the species, so altruism, is altruism adaptive to the transmission of your genetic line, that's different from asking the question, is this fundamentally right or wrong? It's a question of whether it's important for the preservation of the species. That's different from ultimate truth, ultimate goodness.
So would you say that science has absolutely no unique input other than scientists being human beings, which most of them are, I think, that there's no contribution that science can make to morality other than tracing maybe its history or something?
I think that science can inform the subtleties around morality. That is, as in the example of altruism, science can, in fact, tell you whether it serves an adaptive function or might it serve an adaptive function. But when people have to make a moral decision, I think that science is only really very useful at the periphery.
Where are the boundaries of science? I mean, how can you form them today, and where would you feel uncomfortable pushing them beyond? And then, how does this extend into the future? Because the boundaries of science, as we know from history, has been expanding, encroaching, if you will, on the domains of other ways of knowing, like religion. And religion, to some people, has been pushed further and further peripheral and into a corner, and maybe into a spot in the corner in some people's mind.
I actually think the opposite is happening. I think that what's happening is, as scientific understanding of the nature of the world and nature of life, the nature of humans, as science is encroaching more and more on issues that abut against, come up against core human values, we are seeing a greater attempt to influence the course of science by religious groups and by people who have religious values. The most obvious one, of course, is intelligent design and evolution. But think about embryonic stem cell research.
Yeah, but I think that's a political question, but that's not a rational one. I mean, I think we would say that as religion maybe is getting pushed, as the boundaries of science are expanding, there's naturally pressure against the interests of the people it's getting pressed against.
I don't think I would cast it that way. I think what's happening is that, first of all, only scientists are bound to accept what science shows, so that normal people, they don't like the answer from science, good. They can either distort it or they can disregard it. The purpose.
I don't think that's good. I think if science comes up with an absolute.
I didn't say it was good.
Oh.
I didn't say it's good. I said it happens.
Okay.
That is, the purpose of science is to tell us about the nature of the world, whether we like the answer or not.
Right, I agree with that.
The difference between a scientist and a non-scientist is a scientist is bound to accept that answer because that's the answer provided by science of which they are a part. But the rest of the world isn't bound that way.
But they should be.
Well, I don't know. It's hard for me as a scientist to entertain that they shouldn't be. But at the same time, I'm a realist, and I recognize, and we've learned over the course, particularly of the last few years, that when people don't like what science is showing, they just say, no, we're not having it. That's what's happening with evolution and intelligent design.
Wherever it happens, if there is scientific evidence, it's confirmable and it's believable. I mean, I think scientists have an absolute obligation to force that view. But the issue is where do they stop? Where does science have absolute confidence where you would be militant in enforcing that view, because that is true? And where do you go beyond the line, and what are those differences? Where are those boundaries?
I think the boundary lies at the natural world. I think the boundary lies at natural explanations of the natural world. The place where science runs into trouble is when it tries to provide explanations, or worse, tries to provide proof or disproof for supernatural phenomena that are not literally observable, measurable, reproducible by anybody, and that anybody would get the same result every time they do it. Those are the criteria that bind science, and if those are the criteria that bind science, therefore it's got to stick within its boundaries.
And those are the boundaries. And again, I would look at those boundaries as on the other side of it, twofold. One are those kinds of events that are in a different realm, a spiritual world, which people, religions think about, imagine, see, whatever, that are impossible to observe. And then those things within the physical world, which are observable but are non-reproducible. And whether that means they are fallacious and non-existent, or just events that are singular, miracles, answered prayer, revelations, categories that lots of people believe in strongly, which science cannot use its methodology because by definition it's non-reproducible.
Well, reproducible evidence is not a criterion for belief.
But is it a criterion for truth?
It's a criterion for science and for scientific theory, scientific explanation. Truth is in the eyes of the beholder. Truth is an experiential phenomenon. There isn't necessarily an absolute truth that certainly is identifiable through science that goes beyond the realm of the natural world. So as long as you stay in that boundary, science has something to say. Science can give you the best quality answer you can get. Having said that, it can't give you the best quality answer that you can get to everything.
Well, some scientists would be affirmatively atheistic. And they would say that they can prove that God does not exist, there's no spiritual world, but the whole series of mechanisms, however you want to do that. Do most scientists subscribe to that?
I don't know what most scientists subscribe to, but I can tell you that evangelical atheists
Yes.
are probably as fundamentalist in their own way as what we call fundamentalist religious believers, who hold a belief very strongly in the absence of scientific evidence. So the evangelical atheist has no scientific evidence and no more scientific evidence.
The difference being, I don't know if there's a difference or just a distinction, that the evangelical religious person doesn't back their belief. They believe in faith or some personal experience. They don't back it on scientific evidence. Whereas the evangelical atheist would purport to back their theory based upon scientific methodology.
You know, there's an old saying in science, the data speak. I have yet to see the data that disprove the existence of a God any more than the data that prove the existence of a God. It's not a scientific question.